Sometimes there's only one way to take the temperature of a nation, and that's to get out there and stick your metaphorical thermometer wherever you can. So that's exactly what I've been doing. In the weeks leading up to Charles' coronation, I left the cosy confines of the podcast studio and travelled the length of the country, all an attempt to gauge the resilience of the monarchy's popularity. The reason? Well, with the death of Charles' mother and the end of the Second Elizabethan age, it does feel like the House of Windsor is at something of a crossroads, or perhaps the edge of a cliff. No one would argue that Charles possesses even close to the affection enjoyed by the late Queen. And so there is now a debate, a genuine debate, over the family's relevance in the 21st century. And I went to listen. I'm Niall Paterson, and this is the Sky News Daily. I take it you've come here to see Charles today?
Yes.
So what do you think of the man?
I think he's doing a good job.
It doesn't matter who he is, it's the fact that we have a monarchy.
There's a group over there called Republic. And I started my journey in York, at the cathedral there called York-Minster, in fact. Charles and Camilla arrived in blazing sunshine for the Monday-Thursday service.
Part of our heritage and our history.
And thousands were there to meet them.
If you choose to be here, he is the king of this country, and if you choose to be here, then that's what you've chosen to be part of. And if you don't like it, there are always options. We live in a free world.
I don't like football, so I don't go.
Going to be protesting at the coronation in London on May 6th. Come down and join us.
But of course, not everyone is a fan. A small group of protesters gathered with placards reading, "Not My King." This is the anti-monarchy group Republic. Their CEO is Graham Smith.
Well, I've always been opposed to the monarchy. I remember I was 12 years old the year that Andrew and Sarah Ferguson got married, and I objected to the idea of having to sit in the classroom and watch the wedding. And as I got older, it just made more and more sense that this is, not appropriate in a democratic society.
Charles needs to pay his inheritance tax. He needs to stop protecting his brother.
A republic is about making Britain governed better by having an accountable, independent head of state. Monarchy is about saying, you're spectators. You stand over there, wave at us. And being a republic is about being participants, saying, actually, we're not going to have a coronation, we're going to have an election, we're not going to have a Charles, we want a choice.
Yet for now, even Graham would admit theirs is a minority view. Not that public sentiment has been entirely positive of late. Meghan Markle arrived and soon left the United Kingdom and the family into which she'd married, scattering accusations of racism in her wake. Her husband Harry too pulled back the curtain in his memoir Spare. There can be few who don't have an opinion either way on the manner in which they were treated by the firm by Harry's father. Lord Simon Woolley founded Operation Black Vote. I went to Cambridge to meet him.
I think the first thing to say is, hands up whose family isn't slightly dysfunctional. The difference is that it's played out 24/7 for everyone to see. Would I like to see Harry and Meghan back in the royal fold? 100%. The prospect of this family being centre stage with the king unlocks so many opportunities for a multicultural society. I just hope it works for them on a personal level, but for our nation, I think it's a win-win.
For now, a return, let alone a rapprochement, seems unlikely. Harry, but not Meghan, is attending the coronation, as all the world will soon see. And on top of those accusations of racism, we have been learning more of the Windsor's links to slavery. So with that in mind, I headed to Birmingham, one of the country's most diverse cities, with more than half the population from ethnic minority backgrounds. What does the royal family mean to you, if anything?
They don't really hold any relevance to me at the end of the day because I don't see anybody that's like me. At the end of the day, there's nothing that they do that really impacts my life.
Given the things that happen with Meghan Markle coming into the royal family, I think it just kind of shows that the divide is very much real, and that kind of traditional family life that the royals do have is not inclusive.
Now, those were a couple of students from Birmingham City University, and I suppose that what surprised me most was that they had Such strong and clearly much thought about positions on the royals. When I was their age, growing up in the Scottish Riviera in the 80s, well, I just didn't really think about them much at all. The university is also home to the first Black Studies course in the UK. Its founder, Kehinde Andrews, has thought long about the role the royal family plays in a country much more diverse than when Elizabeth II came to the throne.
They are the head of state, right? And this is the state that treats us like subjects. It does not treat us like citizens. We just had the Windrush scandal where people are being deported. You can see pretty much every inequality from education, policing, prisons, health. This is not a good country to grow up in if you're black, and the head of state represents that. It is entirely unreasonable to justify this almost exclusively white family being the representative, not just of Britain, but of 14 other countries with largely black and brown, of the Commonwealth. What that does psychically, what that does emotionally is to put whiteness on a pedestal. That's the role. So if you're serious about it, you have to say, look, we have to abandon this role.
Charles has suggested is that the archives be opened up, that the royal family do start to be somewhat more open about their links to slavery. You scoff there. I take it you don't think too much of that.
I mean, that's the absolute bare minimum, opening up the archives in the 21st century. For a start, we actually know quite a lot already about the royal family's involvement in slavery. And a proper account would be, if he was actually serious, he'd say, well, actually, let's try and account for how much money in reparations we need to pay.
The royals certainly can't shed themselves of that colonial past, though some might suggest they'd better avoid playing up to it, as William and Kate did in their disastrous trip to the Caribbean. And it is certainly hard to style yourself the head of a modernising, forward-looking institution when you wear crowns and live in castles, paid for in part by the profits of empire. None of which is to say that Charles has not had a positive, material impact on his kingdom. Next stop, Cornwall, and the new build town that he himself dreamt up, Nansledden. Built on land owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, I'll admit, on first arrival, that the place struck me as slightly odd. With its perfect rows of pastel-coloured houses, it does feel a little like stepping onto a film set, but the residents love it. Teresa Ferguson is part of the Nansledden Community Association, and the other Scottish voice you're about to hear, her friend Amanda Langley, owns a chocolate business in the town.
I absolutely love it, love living here. What we've got here is a vibrant community, there's lots of things going on.
Clearly, you don't have to be a royalist, you don't have to be a monarchist to live in this part of the world, but I wonder how you perhaps think of Charles, given, you know, that this was a big project for him. It has been something that he and the Duchy have been pushing for a very long time.
Well, I've met him twice. He's interested in how his infrastructure is actually coming to life and what people think about that. He's very passionate about that.
This place will be around in 50 years' time, clearly. I'm going to be cheeky right now and ask you, do you think the monarchy will be?
Personally, I'd like to see it continue, and that's what I look at more than anything. I don't judge someone on the fact that they wear a crown. I judge them on who they are as individuals. So hopefully, I'd like to see it carry on because they've done a lot.
The residents of Nansledden rightly see the positive influence of the Duchy of Cornwall. Others, well, they have a somewhat more nuanced take. So I got into a helicopter and headed, quite literally, into the eye of the storm.
We've now left the mainland, Penzance in fact, and are taking the 20-minute flight, 34-mile trip to the Isles of Scilly, which I am reliably informed are beautiful in pretty much any weather. But I'm also told that there, the view of the Duchy and of Charles, well, it's a bit mixed.
The Scilly Isles have been part of the Duchy of Cornwall estate since the 14th century. The Duchy owns most of the island and nearly a third of the residential buildings there. It's all a bit feudal, really, certainly when you consider that residents pay tithes in the form of ground rent and a surcharge on travel and freight to and from the islands. The team and I arrived just as a storm hit. We actually ended up trapped there for a couple of days. That gave us a really good chance to get to grips with what some, not all, think of the King. Alan, how are you? Nice to see you. Alan Davis, for example, has lived in Scilly for decades. He's a member of Republic and fierce critic of the Duchy. So, if the Duchy of Cornwall owns these places, how much money are they making out of this part of the world?
Oh, well, on ground rents alone, we estimate they take out close on £1 million, and very little of that comes back into the islands in terms of supporting the islands.
So what then is your view of what the Duchy of Cornwall is doing with these islands?
It's a cash cow. They're operating a feudal system and a medieval feudal system, and they're just taking the cash out. Housing is a big problem here. Over 200 properties actually belong to the Duchy. They rent them out, which is fair enough, but they also rent out properties for holiday lets, whereas we need teachers, we need care home assistants, we need people to operate in the hospital.
But it's not just through leases that the Duchy is making its money. It's making its money off every person who comes on.
All the freight that comes on over here, and also everybody who lands on the quay in there, they pay a levy to the Duchy. And I think that we've come to the point where royalty or monarchy is a feudal thing and that needs to be abolished. And the Duchy are actively working against that. They don't want to see it abolished because it'll cut their income.
Softly spoken he may well be, but there was real anger on Alan's part about the money taken from the Isles of Scilly, never to be spent there. Yet he isn't clearly a spokesman for the place, so I went down the pub. Ahead of the coronation, just asking everyone what their thoughts are about Charles, about the royal family, about the coronation itself. I mean, are you going to be celebrating it?
I'm not, probably, but I do work in an old people's home, so, I mean, a lot of that is important to them.
There's a lot of money that goes into them that could be better spent elsewhere.
King Charles is important to us. He's a real advocate for the natural world and protecting wildlife.
I don't think they should hold quite as huge of a place. I don't think we should take them down or anything, but...
You're not calling for revolution?
No, absolutely not. But I think they need a lot less money poured into them, because I don't think they quite serve the purpose they may be used to.
Look down and you might see the light underground, and if you've never been here before, welcome to Jack Bar. Welcome to Jack Bar.
In response to the issues raised in the Scilly Isles, the Duchy says it takes its role as stakeholder very seriously, that it plays a key role in helping to deliver sustainable development and communities, and is facilitating a wide range of opportunities for housing and business. We eventually escaped the storm and just made it back to the mainland. And so I found myself on another trip, a journey I've taken many, many times, although according to my mother, not often enough. The train from London to Scotland, that one part of the UK where polls always suggest that people are slightly less enamoured with the royals than elsewhere. The further you travel from the English heartlands, the more you'd expect support for the monarchy to wane, and Scotland has always been significantly less in favour of the royal family than the rest of the country. Do you know the thing I love about this journey is that it does afford you time to think. And I'm sure the Queen felt exactly the same way. She must have made this journey 100 times, travelling from London to Edinburgh and then on to Balmoral for our summer holidays. As I'm sitting here staring out of the window, I mean, it occurs to me, the Queen famously had a huge amount of affection for this place. I just wonder whether or not this place has much affection for King Charles.
I was for when we had the Queen, I'm not anymore now we don't.
It's much more an English thing than it is a Scottish thing, I feel.
Do you feel like he's your king?
No.
Liked his mum. I don't know, what do you...
I'd rather have him than some presidential elected guy. I'm up to hearing politicians.
As the country gained a new king, Scotland gained a new First Minister. The SNP's Humza Yousaf, someone who's made clear he would wish to bin the monarchy if ever Scotland gained its independence. Now, this is fascinating to me. There is now a very real link between nationalism and republicanism in a way that there just wasn't when I was a boy. It is easily understood, I suppose. The prospect of independence affords the chance to rethink the constitutional arrangement. The SNP MP for Edinburgh East, Tommy Sheppard, is a prominent Republican voice. Explain to me, make the case, if you can, for getting rid of the monarchy. I mean, you're no big fan, are you?
No, I'm not. I mean, I think it's a relic of bygone days that has no place in a modern democratic constitution, to be honest. The question is, can we do better? I think we can have a head of state which is elected. The monarch, at the end of the day, is a creature of the government of the day, and that's not a healthy separation of powers in any constitutional arrangement. And that's simply because, you know, they are hereditary and no one's had a say in choosing them.
The idea that the royal family can persist for so many people in this part of the world does at least suggest to me that it isn't necessarily all about the constitutional arrangement, that it is about something more ephemeral.
I get that there's a sort of stability and certainty that comes from the idea of the monarchy, but, you know, we need to see past that, and people, I think, increasingly understand that in the modern era, this really is a medieval fairy story that ought to be left in the history books.
What's clear from my travels is that those wishing an end to the monarchy will, at the very least, be waiting quite some time. The protests that we saw, always good-natured, were literally drowned out by voices supporting the king. Yet that the death of Queen Elizabeth has sparked a conversation seems to me equally incontrovertible. Charles is, after all, already our king. This coronation, with its rituals, its priceless jewels, and that invitation to pledge our allegiance, well, it's certain to fuel the debate. Whether there will be another of this scale, or even another at all, is less so. Like his mother, Charles talks of a life of service. Entirely understandably, such are the privileges of being born into the House of Windsor. But for all that there is a clear majority in favour of the institution, I suspect that the number for whom that privilege sits uneasily is growing, and growing rapidly. He is the king, after all. Doesn't he deserve a coronation?
Most monarchies ditched these things a long time ago. Charles is already the king. He doesn't need this. This is a pointless parade designed for him to sort of say, you know, look at me, I'm king.
Will he get it absolutely right? I hope so. Is it a bit of a high wire act? Most definitely. I think if you care about your people, then you feel duty bound to say, this is my role in 21st century Britain. And if I seize it, then I can do good things.
The calls for colonial nostalgia is just as strong as it ever were. And that's the function of the royal family. So I actually think that its place in society is very, very, very well set for the next 100, 200 years.
On tomorrow's Daily, I speak to Cathy Lett, a Republican who's also friends with some of the royals, including Charles himself.
He was so prescient. I mean, he was way ahead of his time on all those environmental issues, which I can connect with him on that big time. So, you know, you can't help liking them. I would say Charles's charm is more disarming than a UN peacekeeping force.
In the meantime, if you fancy watching that documentary, it's called My King, My Country, and you can find it on our on-demand services, including YouTube, Sky Q and Catch Up. Many thanks for listening to this edition of the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. This edition was produced by Annie Joyce. Our editor is Philly Board. The coronation on Sky News. Follow the King's procession and the service on TV in ultra-high definition and be part of the day with coverage on the Sky News app and YouTube channel. Also on TV and online, My King, My Country, our documentary on what the future could hold for King Charles III. Follow the coronation all weekend on Sky News.
From the moment Camilla Parker Bowles became front page news.
I need you all the week, all the time.
Oh, God. I'll just live inside your trousers or something. It'll be much easier.
What are you, going to turn into a pair of knickers?
In a scandal that rocked the world.
You've got Prince Charles saying he wants to be a tampon inside Camilla.
Humiliating proof of her affair with Prince Charles.
I have no idea how Camilla coped with the nastiness and the relentless abuse.
But together, Camilla and Charles's love survived.
They've surmounted all of that and they have a true love.
Her reputation repaired.
That turnaround in perceptions of her is remarkable, given just what a low base Charles and Camilla were on. Diana was calling Camilla a Rottweiler.
And now to a new role beside the new king.
This reign will depend, for its success, in no small part, on Camilla.
I'm Kay Burley, and from Sky News, this is Queen Camilla, for the Love of Charles, a new podcast charting her rollercoaster ride to becoming Queen of the Commonwealth.